All right, we want to thank all of you for joining us today, along with our international partners. This is an international session. We have all of us from all over the world. First, our partner is LearnFast. They're based in Australia, and they serve Australia and New Zealand. We have Stronger Brains here in the United States. Brain Maps based in Shanghai, and then we have Brain Fit. They're based in Singapore, but they do cover Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Turkey.
Wow.
Can you go to the next slide, please, Mike? I want to introduce you to your panelists today. And just to explain the flow of the session, we'll have Mike present, and then there'll be a panel discussion. And then, of course, we have this open for Q&A for all of you who are joining us today. So we'd like to welcome Alex Kitts, who's a clinical psychologist and co-founder of Stronger Brains here in the United States. We have Cheryl Chia, who's a physiotherapist and founder of Singapore-based BrainFit. And then we also have Dave Stanley, who's the Director of Learning Ecosystems at LearnFast Australia. Now I would like to introduce your presenter today, Michael Merzenich. And Mike is a serial entrepreneur, author, and world-class neuroscientist. For nearly 5 decades, he has been a leading pioneer in brain plasticity research. In 2016, Dr. Merzenich was awarded one of the world's top neuroscience prizes, the Kavli Prize, for his achievements in the field of brain plasticity. And Michael is a professor at the University of California at San Francisco and the founder of 3 companies, Scientific Learning, Posit Science, and Stronger Brains. So we're so excited that you're here today, Mike, and I'll go ahead and let you get started.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kim, and thank you to all your Zoomers out there. We're going to talk today about the importance of understanding the brain, and it is important. There has been a revolution. Of course, many of you are aware that there's been a revolution on some level. It's a very complicated subject. Be prepared, gird your belts and your girdles or whatever, and we're gonna try to focus on a pretty sciencey subject today. It's important that you understand what's been happening in brain science, and you begin to think about how you can apply that science more directly, you could say, to clinical practices to improve the powers, improve the neurological health and power and ability of every child, of every individual on planet Earth. That's what this is all about, really. And it has been a revolution. Not too many years ago, the predominant belief in science and medicine was that the brain was plastic, could change itself when you were a kid, a very young child, and that by the time you, for example, came to the schoolhouse door and knocked on it and tried to enter it, your brain was pretty much done. It was in its development. Development was complete. The brain was in an adult form. You could say the only way it could really change from that point forward physically was to deteriorate. And actually nothing could be further from the truth. The brain, in fact, is continually revising itself, continually remodeling itself, just like the physical body. Very subject to changing dramatically as a function of how it's used, as a function of how it's exercised. And it's very important for you to understand more about this evolution, and that's what I'm going to talk about. That's the subject of my comments today. We're going to talk about how the brain evolves in ways that accounts for its powers, that accounts for its organic health or lack of same, and basically how we can engage it to make the most out of its operational powers and to assure that it's operating in a healthy and effective way. And through these plastic neurological remodeling processes, which are really remarkable. So there are quadrillions of moments of change in the brain of every individual on planet Earth. Now, quadrillion is a very big number. And in this most complicated of machines ever produced, you could say, on this planet. An incredible level of change accounts for really 4 amazing things. First of all, it creates within our skulls that incredible special version of the world of every individual, every child. And basically, it establishes the basis of controlling our actions within that world. And that world is very much a subject of its cultural, of the culture into which we just happen to be born, of the family into which we just happen to be born, which is, of course, our local culture. And its effectiveness and its evolution is very dependent upon, and how it specializes itself is very dependent upon the circumstances, the positive or negative circumstances of that early childhood and life, and the specific aspects of the cultural environment in which the child has to operate. If you think about what a child has to learn, the skills they develop, the way the brain is refined in its operations in a modern life for a young child born in, let's say, over the last 10 years, the brain's specific abilities are very different from the average brain of a child born 10 years ago, much less 100 years ago. And certainly vastly different from the average brain of 1,000 years before. Because as cultural changes, the demands that are put on the brain are changing apace. The brain is also creating your operational personhood. So everything you're good at, your view of the world, your perspective about the world, is established by brain change within your lifetime, largely within your early lifetime. So every one of us has mastered several hundred fundamental skills and abilities, and they define us as an operational being in the world. And all of this has occurred through brain change, through the evolution of the machinery of the brain within our young lives. Of course, this is a process that's going to continue in all of us across the span of our lives. It also very miraculously is creating yourself. And it's doing this through a massive schedule of associative self-reference. So every time you feel, every time you see, every time you act, every time you think, the brain is making an association to the source of that feeling or action, to that seeing, to that thinking, and that source is you. And through billions and billions of moments of self-reference, you're creating this entity, you're creating a captain of your little ship. And as it's created, and hopefully created in a powerful way, it's actually very, very substantially variable in the power of this self-creation. It basically begins to actually establish agency in the brain. It takes control. It creates a command center for the powers of agency that are refined, hopefully elaborately refined, to establish an effective and reliable captaincy of your little ship. Now, what a miracle this is. I mean, the wonderful emergent self with all of the skills and abilities that define your operational personhood, the creation of the self itself, and all of its operational powers and abilities all arise within you, within your skull, across the period of your early life, across your childhood, and are elaborated all across your childhood, hopefully in a powerful and effective way. This is really what we're going to talk about. Now, I want to talk about a few things and emphasize a few things that you should know about your brain's plasticity. And the first thing, of course, to understand is that your brain is a work in progress, that it's actually continually revising its wiring. It's continually changing itself by use. It's effectively evolving by use. And how you use it and exactly how you engage it is very important for defining, in a sense, how its powers evolve and how its abilities or capabilities will progress in a positive and effective way. Brains get smarter, they get more powerful as a result of the progressive refinement of the machinery of the brain, driven by specific patterns of use. So it's a little bit like having a factory that is initially installed with very poor equipment that can only basically make relatively primitive products. But as soon as you turn on the switch in the factory actually evolves its machinery so that it can make more and more powerful, more and more sophisticated machines or products. And your brain is like that. It's actually changing its processing powers as you engage it from the primitive to the highly refined, if all goes well. It's actually changing its operational capacities and abilities as it changes itself. Not just acquiring information, not just manipulating information, but actually acquiring all of that machinery that can make sophisticated use of all of that information. When you learn any new skill or ability beyond brain rewiring, there are also many other positive physical changes that empower that ability. So it's a little bit like your body. I engage my body in appropriate levels of physical exercise, and almost everything about my physical body and health are advanced by it. Same too in your brain. You're not just changing wiring. When you exercise the brain appropriately, when it's engaged appropriately, everything about its organic health improves. It proves in a unified, in a connected, in a collective way. And we understand the rules that govern these changes. This is one of the great bodies of discovery and investigation of the past 35, 40 years. We now understand how plasticity is governed. We understand if we follow those rules within limits, we can modify the brain in a sense that will. Of course, there are strict limits on that modification because it's all rule bound, but we know the rules, and that's critical to understand. It's important to understand that a young brain does differ from an older brain. In the infant, the brain can't control its plasticity. Its plasticity is substantially unregulated. And what the brain does in that early life is it establishes a basis of controlling its own change. What an amazing thing that is. So the brain develops an ability to interpret the importance of what's happening. It begins to understand what success is in achieving its goals, in advancing itself. And it allows change to occur when it's moving for all those things that are important by the brain's own judgment, or all those things the brain judges to be successful. What an amazing thing, that the brain actually evolves a way to control its own evolution. That's really remarkable, a really remarkable thing that we've inherited, you could say, from God or from nature. It's really important to understand that the processes of remodeling are designed to be bidirectional. I could take any one of you and I could destroy your ability to understand what I say within a month to 6 weeks, maybe 7 or 8 weeks of training. I could take any one of you and I could improve your ability to understand what I'm saying under even difficult circumstances. I could take any one of you and I could train you in the use of your hand in a way that would destroy that use and turn your hand into a useless claw. Or I could take any one of you and I could train you in hand use and refine your abilities beyond however advanced they are to make you more capable in how you control your brain or recognize what you hold within it or grasp or manipulate with it. Remodeling processes are designed to be bidirectional. And the reason they're designed to be bidirectional is that the brain is designed to get the most out of life, to get most out of its operations, no matter the circumstances. So for example, if the brain is challenged in any important way that degrades its operations, it still has strategies to get most out of life by following it down these bidirectional paths. And finally, the mental illness and aberrant behaviors are expected end stages of usually long progressions of negative plastic revision. So we think of these things as diseases. They're not really diseases so much as they are failure modes. The brain in its change processes has inbuilt, necessarily unavoidable, inbuilt failure modes. Of course, sometimes these failure modes are exaggerated or promoted because of inherited weaknesses of genetic issues that are in play that make them more likely. But fundamentally, they represent the brain basically going off in an aberrant direction in a way that distorts its operations because it's designed to change, and it can change in a destructively negative way. Now, understanding all of these things gives us insights into basically how to control these processes to the advantage of the brain and to avoid processes that drive the brain in a hole or in a negative direction. So I want to say a little bit more about this one key aspect of the processes that express plasticity, and that is their reversibility. And we've studied this in my research laboratory, and we studied this in human populations in two fundamental ways. In one way, we compared very old animals about to die and did parallel studies in old humans that aren't so far away from the end of their time on Earth. And we compared their brains in a whole variety of ways with the brains of animals that are in the prime of life, vigorous, young, healthy, full of it, and humans in the prime of life in their 20s, 30s. And basically, we've looked at initially at 17 indices in the first studies, which were led by Etienne de Villiers-Sidani, who's now a professor at McGill University in Montreal. But ultimately, we've extended this list to more than 30, 35, 36, 37 different physical, functional, and chemical measures of brain function. And of supporting structures of the brain. I'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. And the first question we asked was, well, how many of these things are different in a very old versus a prime of life animal, or in the brain of an animal that's had a good early life versus an animal that's had a heavy stress-loaded early life? How many of these things are different? And the answer is, everything is different. Everything is different. Every measure. And then you could say, well, how many of those things that are different actually advantage the animal that's had a stressful early life, or advantage the brain of an animal near the end of life? And the answer is nothing. Nothing advantages them. Everything is negative. Brains that have struggled early in life are slower, they're less reliable, they're physically less developed, they're diselaborated. Everything you measure, basically, they are the older animal, I mean the young vigorous animal, the animals had a good early life, is advantage over the animals had a stressful early life for the animals that is merely older. Now you say, well, why the hell would you do these studies in these two ways? You know, think that there's some equivalence between a brain that's undeveloped because it's had a poor early life and that has lost all of its assets because it's now just very old? Well, what they share in a sense is the fact that plasticity early on and later on is reversible. In a young brain, it's all about advancing to a high level of performance. As you age, it's all about regressing down the reversible slope, that slowly down the slope that you rose at a rapid pace in when you were young. So you end up operationally with a brain that's not so very different near the end of life, if you don't do something about it, from the brain at the early phase of life, when the brain was still underdeveloped. Now, the real question is how many of these negative attributes of a brain that's either had a struggling early life or just merely lived too long, you could say, and without doing anything about it. How many of these things are reversible? That we can take these individuals, children or animals, you could say, to the brain lab, and we can order the brain gym, and we can say how many of these indices of degraded function are reversible in a positive way? How many can be rejuvenated? How many can bring the brain to a healthy state again? And the answer is all of them. Everything's reversible. And it's not simple. It takes several different simple forms of training. But if we train in an appropriate way, everything can be driven back to a high functional state. So here are some of the nature of things that we've measured that are changed in this way. First of all, you change the brain's physical machinery. All of these changes are physical. The brain is a physical organ. It's nothing mental involved here. You change its chemistry in a fundamental way. You change the machinery that controls change processes. It's degraded in a brain that's struggling. It's recovered and restored to higher functionality by engaging the brain that's struggling. You improve its defenses. You improve its nutritional support. You actually elaborate the microvasculature. You actually elaborate the way the brain responds when it's engaged in an active way and in dynamics and in power. You change its information processing machinery. You change its recording machinery. You change its executive control machinery. You change its speed. All of these things are reversible. Slow brains can be speeded up. Machinery, brains that are no longer under powerful control can be brought back under control. You change its accuracy. You change its associative powers. You change its alertness, its brightness. You change its distractor suppression. The whole host of things are altered in a positive direction when the brain is struggling at all. Now, I might say this is not just about a brain that's struggling. Every one of these attributes can be advanced in any brain by appropriately engaging the brain. This is not just a story about struggling brains, but it is a basis for rescuing brains that are struggling in any way. And that's an important thing to consider when you think about the kid in front of you, because you don't necessarily know basically what that brain is up to or where it might be struggling unless you examine it or think about it from this perspective. Now, we've repeatedly shown that these specific forms of brain exercise advance brain power and advance neurological integrity, and that this accomplishes this in normal and in struggling brains. So here's a simple example. This is the young-old example, but I could have also used a young challenge versus young healthy example. And here we're looking at myelin basic protein, which is how much myelin the brain is basically producing at this point in life. And you can see there's a big recovery in an old brain by training the brain. Almost none is being produced in an old brain that's untrained, and you train it. And if you basically calibrate the training, you can basically match the production of myelin that's occurring in a young brain. Here's a second fundamental. This is part of the cardiovascular control in the brain. The brain has a strategy for separating the fluids from blood from the fluids of brains. Young brains that are traumatized or really struggling are leaking from the fluids of blood into brain, just like old brains are. You train the brain and you recover this barrier. And that's really important because the fluids from blood basically contribute to the noisiness of the brain. And it contributes to the brain struggling in a whole variety of ways in establishing its functionality and advancing it. And here's a third example. This is a particular neuronal population. It's basically very undeveloped and weakly expressing in its operations and actions in an old brain, and the same in a brain that's really struggling, and it's recovering those capacities by training it. And again, if you just match, appropriately engage the brain in training, you can completely recover an ability like this. And this is a population particularly important for organizing the temporal activity or actions in the brain. And in fact, we've looked at 35 different specific indices of brain health again, and saw that they're restored and advanced to an organically healthier status by training. Most of these things have been extended to studies in humans as well as animals. Now, I'd like to briefly talk about 3 examples of how this science could be applied to manage and to assure that we can advance an individual's neurological powers. We're going to try to manage and assure brain health, but also to advance an individual's neurological powers. And this is no matter what their starting point. Maybe they're already relatively healthy. But basically what we want to do, first of all, is to detect and address any issues relevant to their organic health, and define the status of neurological assets that really support academic and personal success. So the first thing to do in any kid is to do a kind of neurological survey, beyond a behavioral survey. This is looking at placeholders in behavior using psychophysical strategies that inform us about the neurology. And that's different from the standard neurological assessments. And so the first thing we want to do is just check out the kid and say, is anything really wrong or anything invisible that we can see could be holding back the kid? Well, because we now understand the relationships between physical and functional brain status and the brain's performance capabilities, we can identify many factors that foretell childhood or older age struggles. Maybe we see in a child a weakness that could lead at an older age to clinical depression, or could lead at an older age to a possibility that the child will evolve into an addiction. Or an older age that the child will become, you could say, oppositional or frustrated in life in a way that's destructive to their advance or progress. And then we can address these issues. If you don't detect the problem, neurological problem, you can't respond to it. So it's all about detecting and responding. And of course, many of these problems, even in families that are very successful and very effective, arise in part because of genetic weaknesses. But there also can be brain history-based neurological weakness that can occur at any time. You know, most individuals of bullying or sexual abuse will all occur in children that are of an older age, middle school age or above or. And you should be monitoring what's happening as it relates to the brain health, the potential struggles of every child every so often, for sure. And we've tried to evolve strategies to do that. Periodic therapists monitor brain checks integrated with, as indicated, plasticity-based training are designed to substantially give a child a substantially better chance of basically getting through life in a safe and positive way. So first thing to do is to check out the neurological status of every kid and help them on a path that will keep them safe and effective. The second thing is that every child, I don't care who it is, can grow a stronger and more reliable executive. And then further elaborate its powers of agency. That's executive control. Now, one thing that's missing in most psychologists' view about executive control is a failure to understand that the executive itself, this fundamental self-reference power, grows in the brain as a consequence of very healthy early, or you could say at any age, very healthy, appropriate, heavy engagement that involves a heavy schedule of self-reference as in brain operations. And every brain doesn't have this history. There's tremendous variability in brain health in humankind. Isn't it amazing that a child goes to school and we require they have a physical exam to determine whether they're physically healthy? Where's the mental exam? Where's the brain exam? We assume that because they have a brain and aren't very obviously impaired, that everything is fine in there. Of course, this is silly. There's substantial variability in organic brain health. And especially there are many of those that much of that variability is accounted for by genetic variation. And that's completely invisible. So the only way we can know about brain health is to look and examine it. And the same with executive power. You can grow executive power in a brain, and once you have a powerful executive that's really reliable in control, then you can elaborate its powers of agency. Then training in the skills that relate to executive control really take off. So it's not just about elaborating your operations to operate in operations in thought and manipulation of information in place, but it's also about growing the powers of that executive itself. We now understand the neurological processes that give rise to the emergent self, and we understand how to grow them. And we also understand, once they're in place, how to grow the powers of agency and control. We can index its status by computerized assessment and then ensure that we've grown its powers in almost any individual. Better to have a stronger and stronger captain of the ship that really knows how to take charge and to make the most out of manipulation of information and thought. And that executive, capable of operating with high flexibility and high accuracy at speed, is the foundational basis, of course, of a child or adult's adaptive intelligence. Now, at speed is a critical thing, because that's another thing that we can accomplish, because brain speed is the essence. Faster brains with accuracy are healthier, and they're healthier because the brain can only be fast if it's in a physically advanced state. If a brain is fast with high accuracy, it is healthy by definition. It's more alert. About half of the variance in measures of adaptive intelligence is counted by a single factor, and that factor is speed. There's nothing more important to advance in a brain of a child to make the most out of the operational abilities of that child than to advance its operations, sustaining accuracy at speed. And every brain can be faster. Improvements of brain speed and accuracy are very easy to document. And almost every individual on planet Earth can improve the accuracy of their neurological operations at speed. I have two little simple examples of adults that have trained with our training strategies. One is the most, you could say, recognized, probably the greatest historic American football player. This is Tom Brady. He's about to play in his 10th Super Bowl. Super Bowl is the championship of American football. In 20 years, he's been there half the time. This is an amazing feat. It's basically amazing considering that he's 43 years of age. Most players have retired long before they reach that age. And about 4 years ago, Mr. Brady began using our training strategies to advance his brain accuracy and speed, and he improved them. Now, here's one of the greatest athletes in the in the US, you could say, in history. And he's highly improvable in his operational abilities at speed at an old age. And this is one of the reasons why he's still playing and will play in the Super Bowl and will play probably for several years to come. And here's another example. Harry Kane is a pretty good football player, playing in the British league. And in the last World Cup, won the award as the most valuable player. And he basically played far better than anybody expected. And one of the reasons he did, I think, is because over the year before he played in the World Cup, he began training his brain, using these strategies in which he very measurably advanced the speed and accuracy of his operations. This is another way of saying that anyone, we've trained all kinds of experts, all kinds of, you could say, almost perfect operators in the world, and demonstrated that you can improve their neurological mastery of whatever is important to them by changing the accuracy of their operations at speed. Faster brains are healthier. Faster brains are smarter. For a child in training, the approach we take at Stronger Brains is, first of all, then, to apply extensive pre- and post-training assessments. We're going to begin with assessments that actually, you're going to see in a minute, we assess a child over several days with computerized assessments with extensive battery. Then we use continuous ongoing compliance and progress monitoring, of course, to assist program providers in successful program use. And we apply that with daily brain science education videos, because we found that that's really important to educate the kid themselves about the brain and about how their brain is plastic and how to make the most of it. And then we combine that with exercises designed to strengthen the child's emotion control, their social cognition and control, and their attention control abilities. So whatever the state of those abilities, we're trying to advance them. We're trying to use adaptive training, which is designed to advance the child's fundamental neurological powers to support and accelerate academic and personal progress, of course. And we combine that with training to elaborate the child's now stronger executive control. So we're elemental processing to strengthen executive control, and now we're going to elaborate the child's use of it. And then training to grow resilience against an otherwise probable progression, if we detect one, to older age mental illness, addiction, or oppositional behaviors. And we combine that with training forms known to impact sleep duration and quality and physical health. So this is what the Stronger Brains approach is all about. We're going to test, we're going to identify weaknesses, we're going to fix anything that can get a child in trouble, or fix anything that basically is holding a child back. We're going to advance everything in sight that relates to organic brain health and brain performance. In a daily 45-minute long session in the Stronger Brains program, an 10 to 18-year-old kid first completes a brief daily self-report, then they watch a usually entertaining or compelling brain science education video. Then they complete a short calming epoch of computer-guided meditation, because that helps the brain be in a good position for learning and changing itself. And then they complete other exercises designed to strengthen habits that stabilize emotion control, because emotion control basically contributes to a better learning session. And then they enter the brain gym, where they complete a program series of brain remodeling exercises. And this all begins with a 3-session-long computerized assessment battery delivered in the first 3 and the last 3 of 60 training days in the first training cycle, with embedded measures of neurological performance automatically recorded 10 to 30 times in every daily training session. So test continuously, test extensively before the kid is trained, test after each training epoch extensively, to continually evaluate the status of the kid and to affirm that the training has been effective in driving the changes that we're targeting in the training. We use BrainHQ exercises in the Brain Lab, and they're applied on pads and smartphones. And those exercises are adaptive for individualizing training. They're optimized for rapid gains. They target powers of physical functional brains. A whole series of targets are important. They're extensive to achieve improvement or rejuvenation in all brain system levels in all domains. They continuously validate outcomes in every exercise cycle, again, 10 to 30 times per training session, and they're proven to work. So more than 250 gold standard random assigned control trials report outcome results using these tools. And there are actually more than 350 additional trials now underway across the world. And those trials involve tens of thousands of trainees. So we know these training tools work. We know what they do. They're extensively physiologically and behaviorally validated. And many studies document that they're changing the targeted things in the brain that we're trying to get to change in a positive direction. The tools for the Stronger Brain Program provider, first of all, we provide online Stronger Brains provider training and certification. We provide access to a program provider portal, of course, for enrolling new trainees and to monitor their compliance and progress. We provide detailed pre-training and post-training status reports on the trainees' organic brain health, on the neurological assets and weaknesses enabling or eliminating their academic and personal success, on extensive issues or risk factors that might impact their current or future mental health or signal future addictions or oppositional behaviors or other issues like this. And we provide them with a documentation of impacts attributable to each SB training cycle. So we're continually informing the provider about what's happening with the kid and about how the training is impacting the kid and whether the targets are being achieved. We also provide the provider, of course, with technical and other implementation support assistance and with support and test forms for annual downstream brain checks. Basically, what we commonly do is we engage a child in a single phase of training in which we intensively check everything and basically provide a child with training that's designed to strengthen the executive and to strengthen their basic operations and to speed up their brains. And then we reevaluate and we look for specific weaknesses that might indicate downstream risk, things that might frustrate or limit their progress in life or in school. And we also and then we monitor what's happening to the child across time. That's our goal. Stronger Brains is also working on phase 2 SB program models. It's working on the production of a Stronger Brains parent guardian portal, which a provider would deploy at the provider's discretion. And this would basically bring the parent or guardian into play to help strengthen parent-child communication and to tie the parent to or guardian to the provider, the extent to which the provider thinks that's a good idea. We are developing automating strategies to help assure trainee compliances, not to leave so much of that burden on the provider. And we're developing a second, almost fully automated program version specifically targeting very high needs children. I might say that we've trained children that are really struggling and we can rescue them with relatively high reliability. You're going to see reports about this appearing in the literature very soon now. There are a new series of training programs that are specifically designed for 4 to 10-year-olds. We can't now get to children below about the age of 10 with the tools that we have in hand, but we'll get to that in short order. We're organizing, we've initiated random assigned control outcome trials conducted in a variety of practical school settings. And we're initiating a special study in which our goal is to track the older age fates of every Stronger Brain trained child. And we'll ask you, if you decide to be a provider of Stronger Brains tools, to voluntarily help us achieve this important goal. And we have strategies that are designed to help you track what's really happening to a child out across the span of their life. We have many other active targets of this translational neuroscience. I don't have time to talk about them. They mostly relate to children that are really struggling, and that's not in the domain of interest of most of you. Autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, apraxia, sociopathy, concussion treatment and prevention, traumatic brain injuries, addiction treatment, oppositional behaviors, mental illness resilience, and this is for individuals that are relatively high risk. Mental illness treatments is another thing that's of great interest to us, being actively pursued. High performance athletic training and youth job apprenticeship training. All of these things are things that we're working hard on and have some traction on in the research side of our enterprise. Now, this won't happen overnight, but this is a revolution in our times, in your time, which will ultimately be recognized as a really important era, because this is an era in which we will first come to understand how to routinely evaluate, repair, and if necessary, and manage our children and our own older age brain health. We should be managing brain health in every individual on the planet, from birth to death. We should be paying attention to the organic health of the brain, and we should be sustaining it in good stead across the span of every life, certainly every child's life. This is the era in which we will finally begin to implement strategies that grow resilience in children at risk for a host of preventable older age catastrophes. Now, the emergent mental illness is not limited to children that really struggle in early life. 70% of mental illness is attributable to factors that arise and are expressed in young life of children. And we should be detecting these risk factors, and we should be doing something about it to grow resilience. We can do this on a large scale. So one of our major goals in all of this research is to try to basically detect indicators of future problems in the domain of mental health and doing something about it. Doing something about it to make a child stronger, to make sure that they don't progress to depression or suicide or an anxiety disorder or to schizophrenia or whatever. And even in the case of inherited illnesses, we know we can make a difference by engaging the brain to strengthen it. We first begin to understand in this era that an individual child's neurological status is actually the primary determinant of their academic and personal success. Every child could and should have a neurologically stronger brain. They can have it, they should have it, because once we know that having a stronger brain is achievable for every child, we should be getting into the business of helping them achieve it. And finally, we shall more reliably and more continuously help every child adopt habits that support a lifetime of continuous personal growth. Because we now know that we can all live in our lives with a pattern of continuous development and growth from the beginning to the end of our life on planet Earth. So we're trying to be on a path of continuous change for all of us, very much for the better. And I know this is a complicated subject, and I know I've talked a lot about a lot of things that might be a little confusing. So go to a book that I've written called Softwired. It's not easy to acquire on Amazon for more information. And there's a website that supports the book that has many references that you can of this research and a lot more elaborate descriptions about the research itself. If you're interested in the Stronger Brains program to learn about it and to learn about how you could be certified in its use, or to initiate program usage, then go to contact@strongerbrains.com and you'll get immediate help. If you have a personal question or a question that's beyond the question that are asked in the question and answer period that will follow, go ahead and send me an email and ask your question, and I'll try to answer it. Probably won't get it tomorrow, but I will answer it ultimately. And I thank you for listening to this and being a participant, I hope, in the revolution. Because we can change the world, we can transform it very much for the better for every kid, and have a stronger, healthier, better, stronger, happier life. Let's help them find their way there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was great. Thank you. We want to open this now up to our panel and see what questions you have. And of course, continue putting for those who have joined us, the participants, please put your questions into the Q&A area of this webinar.
That was fantastic, Dr. Merzenich. A couple of questions. Talking about risk factors, we know that kids have been exposed to trauma as well as ACEs. You said, I don't know if people in other parts of the world know what ACEs are, but adverse childhood experiences are very correlated with problems downstream in the mental health.
Right.
So some of your thoughts about that, the impact on the brain and intervention, and as well as generally about, do you feel that these interventions can contribute to the prevention of learning disabilities, other forms of mental illness?
Yeah, well, first of all, of course, Many children, a significant fraction of the children that show up at school have had really, really difficult childhoods. They've had childhoods that are stress loaded, often, way too often abuse loaded. And that actually damages the brain. The soft damage to the brain is substantial. It degrades development. Commonly in a family that's really struggling, there are also disadvantages in the advance of the brain that come from the fact that the experiences of the child are relatively impoverished. Language is used less complex ways. There's less communication between parents and children, for a whole variety of reasons. The child does not have the rich and intensive experiences that a child might have in a more advantageous early environment in life. And all of these things are reversible. The child is going to be behind. It takes catching up to do, but that catching up can be achieved, of course. But of course, a lot of adversity occurs in an invisible way, in an unseen way. The family might not even be aware of it. In fact, the family might be thriving. And then things that happen in a life. The child that might be persistently bullied at school, that a child might self-identify for whatever reason as a failure in life and in school, maybe socially, and then all of these things have impacts on the neurology of the brain. They have impacts on the physical brain and on its functional operations. They can turn that positive change switch, you could say, in the negative direction. But they're all reversible. That's the point. All of these things, once identified, can be addressed by appropriate targeted training, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. The second thing you said about learning disabilities, of course, there are inherited factors that affect the learning machinery of the brain itself. So there are instances in which the brain basically can be impeded or impaired in its ability to advance. But this is a relatively rare circumstance. I mean, one of the things that we've seen that's really surprised us the most in training children that are really struggling is how almost every child that shows up in our program can be substantially moved in a positive and improving direction. And the biggest movement are seen in the children that seem to be struggling the most. So, we've been able to rescue children that seem hopeless, that seem like they'll never get it, that seem like they'll never be able to accomplish much in life. And we can see that they can be advanced to the point where they can have processes of being very competitive in life. And that's really what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you.
Really cool. If I can put my hand up. Dr. Merzenich, thank you. Always get inspired listening to you talk. And I have two questions. One, a short answer following up from something I heard you say a few years ago. And that was you actually measured the age of your brain as an
Right.
adult learner.
Right.
And the second part is far more adults in the world than kids, and we're all dealing with aging brains. A little niche of that area is traumatic brain injury and the different things that impact us around the world. How much physical damage are we still able to work with
Right.
the processes of neuroscience?
Right, that's a really good question. Of course, it's a complicated question because physical damage can come in so many forms, and so addressing problems of physical damage have been is complicated by those specifics. But let me just say that two things. One common thing that occurs in children is that they suffer from concussions in sport. So that's or maybe from a bicycle accident or other things like this. Our training strategies are actually used by professional athletics to accelerate recovery from concussion. And the way they do that is that they drive plastic changes that affect not just the operational capacities of the brain and recover them. When the brain is concussed, it slows down because the brain becomes very noisy, because the blood-brain barrier, the barrier separating the fluids from the blood compartment with the brain compartment, basically is compromised. And And the ionic constituencies in blood actually create noise in the electrical machinery of the brain. And basically, you have to reseal the brain, and then you have to recover the speed. Both of those things occur as a consequence of training. So when you look at the brain, a month or two after training, the brain of such an athlete going through the training looks relatively normal. If you don't do that, a year later, you can still see clear signs in the brain of concussion. So that's one example of really remarkable differences can occur that are beyond just recovering functionality. You're actually recovering the health of the organ. And the same applies when you think about the brain being wounded by a bleeding in the brain or by a loss of tissue in the brain because there's been a blockage of a small artery in the brain. The brain has a power to make really, really substantially large-scale substitutions in which it can reorganize brain tissue basically to recover function, and it can be remarkable. Now, there are limits to it, of course, and the limits apply to exactly how the wounding has occurred, and of course, there are limits to how the brain can be re-engaged to drive the changes that you need to make to generate full recovery. But we're entering an era in which we see almost every case in which the subject can participate in training. We know that very substantial advances can occur beyond anything we imagined would be possible not so many years ago. And so I don't want to exaggerate the fact that there can be wounds that are beyond healing, but we're entering a new era in which we look at the power of this as medicine and are exploiting it in an increasingly powerful way by training. I might say one last thing. There are strategies that have been developed by a former colleague of mine at the University of Texas in Dallas, who actually has been fooling in the brain to think it's in a learning mode, even when the person can't move. And he's been able to reanimate brains in human subject and patients that can't move, or beautiful studies in animals, to demonstrate that they get moving them up to a point in which they can move again. Really remarkable progressions of recovery seen by exploiting brain plasticity processes that are understood with increasing clarity. That was a very long answer.
It was a great response. You did sidestep the first question, and I know you engage in training your own brain health.
Oh, yeah.
Would you put a number on your age of your brain these days?
Well, I can tell you that if I were 20, I calibrate to be at about the 70th percentile. That's pretty good. But I'm not 20, I'm 79. So at 79, I'm only at the 93rd percentile. But my brain would be equivalent to being roughly the brain of an average 16-year-old.
That's too bad.
And it's scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's scary.
No.
I really love the fact that you continually talk brain health and brain functionality. The two go together, the health of it as well as the functionality of it. Thank you again for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome, Alex.
Dr. Merzenich, thank you so much. I think your presentation was really inspiring, and you are very inspiring as well. And my question pertains to the rate of change. So in the course of our work, in brain training with children, what we have seen is that some children improve really, really quickly with, visible behavioral changes and all, but other children take more time. So my question is, so apart from thinking about frequency and intensity of training, considering nutrition, lifestyle factors, what other considerations, would you advise? Could you comment on that?
Well, there are a couple. That's a great question, Cheryl. And there are a couple of things at play. One is that the machinery of the brain that's controlling change can be downregulated. It can be in poor shape. And basically, exercises that are exercise. When we apply exercises, we're actually one of the main goals in our training is to upregulate that machinery again. So there are facets of the training that are specifically designed to upregulate the production and release of those neurotransmitters that are controlling change itself. Primary agents are acetylcholine, noradrenaline, dopamine, we're trying to upregulate them and to increase their functionality operate. And we know we're upregulating. So we can train a person, you could say in sort of a pre-training way, for 8 or 10 hours. And basically what we do is we increase the levels of production of acetylcholine and noradrenaline brain-wide very significantly. And with that, we see an accelerated learning rate. We can proceed every training session with a 10-minute period of a special form of exercise. And then over the subsequent period of training, the brain advances about twice as fast. And that's because we've increased the level of release of primarily noradrenaline. And as a consequence of its release, basically the brain is in a real learning mode. So in a variety of ways, you can upregulate, you can engage the brain in ways that upregulate its capacity to change and the rate at which it will change or can change. The second reason that changes can be delayed is because sometimes you need to establish the foundational abilities before you can drive the improvements of the abilities that you're targeting with a behavioral strategy. So to cite a simple example, I can train a child a lot in improving their ability to manipulate information and thought, or to find 10 ways to solve a problem. But if I have a poorly established executive, a relatively weakly established executive functionality, there's nobody up there very reliably to basically to go to that next stage that can reliably operate in this complex, next level of complex manipulations. You need the foundations. Just like the brain needs to have gone through a progression of the fundamentals that set up mathematical ability before it can basically become very sophisticated in mathematics. You can't jump over them and just go to trying to operate in problem solving at a higher level. You have to deal with the fundamentals. So that can take a long time. I mean, because you have to go through the stages that put everything in place that can contribute to real success. But every child can go through those stages. Every child can follow that path. And at an older age, they can do it a hell of a lot faster than they did as a little kid. And basically, that's what we're trying to get to. Trying to say, who doesn't have these foundational skills? Is that really what's holding them back? Let's step back and make sure they're in place. And once they're in place, this kid can get past those frustrations that are holding them back and can really move forward at an accelerated rate.
So, Mike, two questions. So one's from the general audience. One had to do with kind of, so you've gone through the intervention. What does a maintenance schedule look like for somebody who's shown benefit but wants to maintain it? What should they be thinking about with regard to maintenance? And then I'll follow up with the second question after that.
Right. Well, we do two things. The first thing is that at the end of a cycle of training, we ask the therapist that it's an application at school. We would ask the people that are administering the program in school. We ask them to reassess the child, of course, and then we basically are trying to identify not just the advances that have been made as a function of training, but of course to set a platform to understand what the further needs are for the child to advance to a high performance level. And then in a second stage of training, the therapist, the family would have the option to carry the child through that second and higher phase of training. And what we're trying to do is to line up these phases of training so that basically the child can do a relatively complete job of bringing themselves up to high speed in operations in whatever is important to them in achievement and accomplishment. But the other thing that we're trying to accomplish is to install, when this is applied, at least annual brain checks. So, and basically from those brain, and this is in part because we want to make sure that abilities are sustained. And we want to make sure that if any vicissitudes have arisen in life that are a setback to the child, that might lead to some future instability, that might lead to a mental illness, something that could be harmful to the child, that we detect it and we do something about it. So again, this is part of a strategy of trying to manage the health of the brain of the child and to manage their operational abilities in a way to assure that they're going to be moving forward to high success.
Right.
So people have done studies in which they said, well, how much do we have to continue to train to maintain the brain at speed? So they trained the brain for 10 hours and they advanced the brain in speed so that it was, let's say, twice as fast. This is a real experiment. And then they say, well, how much do I have to train in every subsequent year to keep this brain up at that high speed? Twice as fast as when they started. And the answer is approximately 1 hour a year. So some of these abilities have a long sustaining impact. The reason is that the brain is now operating at speed and it's practicing the hell out of it. Right? So it doesn't necessarily take a heavy continuous practice basically to maintain high ability, but you want to check it. You want to check it because something terrible could have happened to that kid in that year that could have really slowed it down. A bang on the head, some form of abuse, subject to some self-appraisal that's very negative, something. And you have to basically look every so often to make sure that kid is still moving forward. And maybe you want to say, well, at this point, damn, he's twice as fast. Why not be 3 times or 5 times as fast? Because that might be possible in that child. So anyway, that was another long answer, but.
Okay. So the second part was, so we have more than 5 or 6 questions where somebody says, I have a child with autism on the autism spectrum, with or without coexisting apraxia or some other issue, and they're kind of asking a question about use, and so. Right, we have our providers here that, Cheryl, who's been doing this for, I don't know, Cheryl, you and I have worked together with Fast Forward and BrainHQ and others for about 17, 18 years maybe. Dave Stanley, the center in Sydney, I think was the first center we had outside the US. So a lot of experience here. And I'm referring people back to some of those centers because those centers, of course, know they'll meet the child, they'll get a chance to build those foundational skills that you were talking about and accelerate them.
Right.
Do you have a sense as to, the difference in some of these attentional issues or language issues? What are kind of the minimum developmental levels that you think that are out there that allow people to get on board if they're working with a good provider?
Well, we have the tools that we've created at Stronger Brains are limited to application in the older age because we're primarily relying on the training tools that are provided by Posit Science, the BrainHQ tool set. And so we really can't address problems in children of a younger age than about 10. I mean, most children at age 8 or 9 can use these tools and be on task, but they're not particularly appropriate for them. So sort of the break point for us is about age of 10. Scientific learning tools are an alternative. There's definitely one alternative because they have really good tools they're unfortunately somewhat limited to the language and language-related domain. But they're still powerful and effective in their application. We're trying to get to create tools that are more broadly cover the landscape for children of the younger age. And we're trying to get to tools for children of the younger age that in assessment that look more directly at issues of neurology and not just issues of behavior.
I know that even with adults at corporations that we've worked with, having an on-site kind of support person can double the speed at which they progress through the exercises. Right. Just by keeping them on task and focused.
Yeah, well, one thing that we've been doing, and it's still experimental, is we've been working on the development of a training set that really targets the child that's really impaired. And we basically are independent of labels. Some of these children would be identified as autistic, but they could have all kinds of other bases of their substantial impairment. We found that almost all of these children can be brought under control. It might take 6 months or a year of intervention more on the emotional and social control side. before we get to a point where they can actually enter the brain gym and operate effectively in it. We have to do all kinds of revitalization of machinery, again, that controls learning itself. Many of these children do not have a very strong development of executive control. And that has to be constructed. So it has to go through a relatively long process. But over a period of about a year, there are really remarkable examples of recovery in these child populations. And one of the really interesting things to us is that they don't have a hell of a lot to do with the label of the child.
Yeah.
Really doesn't matter what the child has been called. And you know, I think that, again, we're entering an era in which the potential of rescuing children that we've imagined to be almost unreachable. I think that we're going to make big inroads in these populations. And we're going to see a lot of these kids can be advanced to the point that they can have a relatively effective life and operate with relative success in life. And again, this is something that we're trying hard to get better and better tools to address. Again, we're limited by the fact that we can't get the younger children. So hopefully that's temporary. And we can get to more effectively to children of a younger and younger age. So we really should begin with children when they're 2 or 3 years of age. We know that. Much less 5 or 6.
Any other questions? Anything else that's come on through our Q&A? And again, we encourage you to keep putting in your questions, even though we are getting towards time right here. I know we've gone a little bit over, but we will get back to you if it's not covered right now. Maybe one more question. I don't know, Tom or Steve, that have come in through the Q&A.
I thought there was a pretty cool question in the Q&A on the connection between body movement and neurological benefit, and probably plays to Cheryl's key strength as well. Mike, comments on the link with body movement activity?
Yeah, right. I've sort of ignored talking about that, and Dave, and that's a dumb admission because, you know, the control of the movement of the body, and of course, any kid that's struggling at all is not very good at controlling the movements as a rule, and that's because they're linked. Because the process of the control elaborate movement, sophisticated movement, fluent movement is also related to the process of control elaborate and sophisticated operations and thought. And just as elaborate voluntary movement is controlled by the top levels of the brain, you could say, and in their elaboration are refined in more and more sophisticated level by their operate, so too is thought. You know, the processes are not different. And there's definitely a carryover between the control of your actions and the control of your thoughts. And so in a holistic way, you absolutely want to get to this side of the brain and life in a complete revitalization or development of the abilities of any child. So one of the things I hate in the world is the notion that we can substitute, in a sense, mindless exercise for physical exercise that actually engages the brain in controlling the sophistication of movement. Because that's mindful exercise. That's exercise that's growing brain power as it's growing physical strength and agility and fluency. And that's what you want to do. You want to grow that agility and that flexibility and that all of that fluency while you grow the same equivalent fluency in the operations and thought and in the brain in general. So absolutely, Cheryl, keep it up. And this is a big part of it. So I just want to say one final thing, and that is read the book, damn it. And go to contact@strongerbrains.com if that sounds like something you'd be interested in doing, and find out more and sort out what it would take to try this and see it and see if it could help some of the kids that you're interested or maybe the kids you love. And I think it is a little more neurological than anything maybe like this that's out there. And that's certainly the intent. And it's another way of looking at these age-old problems, and maybe we're on the path to really solving them. And that I hope that proves out to be fully true, and maybe you can be a part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you again to that panel. Again, we could not do this without our partners. And just working with being at Elite Performance Solutions, we do provide our software and services through our partners. So again, thank you to LearnFast and BrainFit, Brain Maps, as well as Stronger Brains. And thank you again to all of you. And this session will be recorded and we'll be sharing the link with everyone, along with the slides that Mike presented today. So thank you so much, everyone.